Welcome to the Business Brains and BS podcast, the podcast for people building businesses, battling their own brains, and occasionally stepping in a little BS along the way. Today, we're going to talk about money, and we're going to talk about the mindset around money. And Greg and I were kind of kicking this around earlier, trying to think of, what do we want to talk about? And I think that money is such an emotional thing, and obviously it's emotional in relationships, but it's emotional for us individually as well as business owners. And I know so many people, when you grow up, you hear all the time, money is the root of all evil, and that I think can play a really negative impact on our mindsets. As business owners, because we're in business, we want to make money, but then we have this little voice in the back of our head telling us that maybe money's not a good idea, maybe we can't use it. So I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about money and business here in a minute, but let's kind of kick things off with maybe the psychology behind that, Greg. If you maybe would share a little bit of a little bit of thought on that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, money means different things to different people, right? Something that when I in previous jobs, I would think about money more
Mm,
as a scoreboard, meaning like there was a period of a few years where I was my family, like, we were getting by fine. Our bills were paid, like no concerns financially. Um, but I wanted to know that I was getting paid more than people I worked with. Because to me, that was an indication that I'm doing well, from a job perspective. If I advance in the company, I expect more pay. Not because I'm destitute, but because that just signals that, like, hey, we value what you're doing. Um, and then that can just, for me, that's always been something that kind of continued to go as long as I worked for someone else. It was like, well, if I keep doing better, I expect more money. Again, not because I necessarily need more money, but because it's just a way to validate. You wouldn't be giving me more money if you didn't think I was doing something right. You know, um, so that's just one way to look at it. That's kind of
mhm.
some of the psychology for me in that period of my life. I think for some people it ties into their pride. Everyone's heard the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses." Can I afford certain things? And then that can become a real slippery slope because, um, you move to a new neighborhood, you got a new set of Joneses to keep up with, you know? Um, and then, yeah, like you were saying, the root of all evil, for some people, it's seen as like a bad thing, to have too much money. I've talked to people, I've heard people express an idea that like anybody who's really wealthy
Oh,
must be
yeah.
kind of corrupt or, must be doing something shady. Like you can't become wealthy if you don't. So yeah, I think the psychology, man, it varies a lot, and so much of it is based on, yeah, what we're taught, how we're conditioned. Um, Everybody's born with the instinct to provide a certain level of safety and security and even comfort in our own lives. So we all have that basic instinct, and then beyond that, I think a lot of it has to do with our
Yeah, well,
conditioning.
and I think
You
it's
know,
interesting too, because as you were saying that, you got me thinking. You and I both had our stint in corporate America or being employees for somebody else, and at that point, it was, I'm recognized by somebody else for doing a job and doing it well, and they're going to reward me by giving me more money, right? So I think there was maybe a little bit of a disconnect there because I was like, okay, this wasn't me doing this. This was I did my job and somebody else said, okay, you did well. Here's a reward for it. But then you move out and you start your own business, and now the business starts to become profitable and you start looking at that, and it's like, okay, what do I do with this? I'm not used to having to make these decisions. And I think, you made a very interesting point too, that a lot of people do look at people who have some wealth and think, okay, they must have gotten there by doing something unscrupulous. And unfortunately, we have a lot of examples out there in the world to back that up. But I was thinking about a friend of mine who lived in a very nice house, and he had invited some friends over, and they'd never been to the house before. And when the friends showed up to the house, the attitude changed. It was all of a sudden like, you are no longer the same people who we knew outside of this gated community because now we found out you have money, so you probably think you're better than us, or maybe it's we think you're better than us, So it really is an interesting, an interesting thing. So how do you look at money, as a business owner? I mean, how do you define it or categorize it?
I think these days for me, when I think about money as far as my own personal finances, I think about it as it
Yeah.
relates to freedom. Basically, like, money gives freedom to the more money you have, the more freedom you have to, be where you want to be, do what you want to do, run things on your own schedule. I'm certainly not as far along on that path as I'd like to be, but that's what I think about when I think about, man, it would be nice to have more money. That's really what the kind of things I'm thinking about is the extra freedoms that that would allow. When I think about money in terms of my business, it's really interesting. Some advice I heard one time was um, relation to like poker, and the person was saying like, in a poker game, you can't think of your chips in
Uh,
terms of cash. They're just chips because, they were saying like if you think about like this chip is worth, I don't know, $20, um, it might start to get to into your head,
right.
how much you're putting into the pot. Instead, you just need to think of it as it relates to all the other chips. And that's how it is in business. You think about, it's not so much the dollar amount and like in terms of what it can buy or anything like that. It's just like this is how many chips
Mhm.
you need to do this thing. Because if I, over the years, the numbers that I deal with in my business, of course, have increased. And um if I sat and thought about, you know, I don't know, I'm not to get um too in depth into personal stuff, but I mean, there are times, I'm doing payroll and I'll spend more on payroll in a month than I
Mhm.
personally make in a whole year, you know? And so if I stop and think about it like that, like, man, I put how much out there in payroll? Like it seems like this big overwhelming number, but it doesn't do any good to think about it like that. That's just how many chips it takes to
Right.
have the amount of players that I need for this particular game, you know? Um, so no, I think that wasn't the cleanest use of that
Yeah, I
metaphor,
got
but
you
I think you got my point. Um, so in terms of personal view of money, it's like,
in there.
how much freedom can I attain with this amount of money? In terms of business, it's like it's money, but it's not money. It's just tokens that it takes to keep playing,
Yeah, and I've
you know?
I've
What
had
about
to I've
you?
wrestled with it, because, it is one of those things that, the love of money is the root of all evil, right? But I like nice things too. I like nice experiences. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, there was always that, are you worthy of this? And is this the right thing to be doing? And in kind of working through and thinking through realizing that money is nothing more than a tool, right? And just like a hammer or a saw or whatever it is, how you decide to use that tool is really the most important thing because, as your business has grown, as my business has grown, we've had the opportunity to do things with the money that we've made, right? We've got this podcast that allows us to reach out to, I think we're up to three, four listeners now. No, hi mom. But it's allowed us to put funds behind this to help people. It's allowed you and me to employ people. It's allowed us to buy goods and services. So we're helping the economy. And I think when you stop and you look at money as a tool and you think, okay, what can I do with this tool? How can I make the world better? How can I make other people's lives better, and how can I make my family's life and my life better? I think that's a good thing. But again, it all just comes back to how do I look at this, and do I have a scarcity mentality or do I have an abundance mentality? because, I don't know if you noticed, but the government just keeps printing money. So there's plenty of it out there. We just have to have the right mindset to be able to go out there and get it. So as we were talking, this kind of made me think about maybe a little bit different twist on this topic. And I realize you are maybe a little, well, you're a little hamstrung with what you get reimbursed by insurance, but then you're also able to set your fee for cash pay uh, customer clients or patients. I'm able to set my in coaching investment as well. And I've talked to a number of business owners who own who have said I struggle with charging what I'm worth. So what are your thoughts on people not charging what they're worth from kind of again that between the ears standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, terms like worth, that's so subjective. What does that even mean? Um, you know, when I think about that, I think about it in terms of like, like as a
Mm,
therapist, like, well, how good of a therapist am I? Or if I'm talking to another therapist, well, how good of a therapist are you? You know, obviously that's a factor. Periodically I do an ethics presentation, and that's actually one of the things we talk about when we talk about some of the business ethics of counseling. How much do you charge for your services is one of the conversations we'll have. And so some of the factors we discuss are that, like, how good are you? How experienced? What kind of credentials do you have? You know, those sorts of things. But then there's so many other factors. I mean, where you're at in the world, is a factor. Um, I grew up in a little bitty town in rural Oklahoma, and you can't charge as much there as you could even here in the Tulsa area, you know? And then you can't charge as much here as you could charge in Los Angeles, And so that's a factor. Your clientele is a factor, knowing what they can afford. So many just basic, economic lessons. Supply and demand is always a factor. So for me, it really comes down to, if I'm just being honest, trying to set a price, it's, well, what can you reasonably charge in terms of what people will pay? I mean, so you got to look at the other people that do what you do in your area and how much they're charging, you know? And then, we, like, for us, we try to have some variety in the prices we
mhm.
charge, especially for self-pay clients, um, because we know not everyone can afford the same amount. So we do that, and, with, like, who we bring on board, so somebody can pay a little less. The person they're gonna be working with is gonna be a less experienced or less credentialed provider. It doesn't mean they suck, it just means
True.
they haven't had as much time in the business. Um, so, but yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, just brass tacks, how much are people willing to pay for your service? That's the answer. Um, if somebody, you mentioned a while ago, like, am I worthy of making this much? I mean, I think you kinda already alluded to this one, but when someone's in that spot, they've left economics 101. That's totally a you problem in terms of, like, that's a psychological issue that probably ties into all kinds of things, childhood rearing, life experiences, personality. Um, so I would say if someone's really struggling with that, give me a call. I can set you up with a therapist who can help with
There you
with
go.
those
Yeah, it's
self-worth
funny. Greg and I
issues.
have joked a couple of
Um,
times that it seems like I will coach him sometimes on the podcast, and one of these days we're just gonna roll in a couch and I'm gonna lay on it, and Greg's gonna therapize me. But it is kind of funny though, because as you were saying
yeah.
that, it was making me think about um, where I've come with the coaching investment. Um, and one of the things that helped me be more comfortable charging what I'm worth is that once I built enough of a clientele, I was then able to go to a couple of nonprofits and offer to coach them, for free or at a discounted rate type of deal, right? To gift them coaching. And it was really kind of a neat thing because having the business stable financially enough allowed for that opportunity to now start to give away and give back, not just in a financial way but in a products and services way as well. So again, I think that being able to charge what you're worth, to have that understanding of money being a tool, allows you to be able to do so much more good out there in the world. And you were talking about this as far as your pricing, and you looking at, okay, what are the experience? What's your experience? What is your competition charging? And I think that's one of those things that, excuse me, you've got to test and measure, because when you start to reach a certain level of capacity, it's time to raise your prices. Right, and if people continue to pay you at your new price and you reach that next level of capacity, it's time to raise your prices again and test and measure that. I've got several clients who I've told them, you are not charging enough. You're not charging your worth. You've got to increase it, and they have reluctantly bumped their prices up and had nobody bat their eyes. So then we bumped the prices up again, and nobody batted their eyes, and then we bumped the prices up again. One company batted their eyes, but guess what? They were the pain in the ass customer who we really didn't want to be working with anyway. And by continuing to bump our prices up to be what they should have been in the first place, we moved that other customer out, and we're actually making more money by having to do less work, right? Which allows us then to get some leverage to
Mhm.
multiply.
Yeah, and value, is obviously a factor too. That old saying, "You get what you pay for," that's often true. Um, so, like, I'm thinking about we just recently added a new service, neurofeedback, and that's something that's you see in a lot of different places, but
Mhm.
everyone does it differently, and you have to use specialized equipment for that, and everyone's equipment is different, and, um, there's different levels of training and everything that people have, and so, price-wise, we're on the higher end on that particular service, but it's because we got really good high-end equipment that costs a lot of money. Our provider that's doing it has done tons of training, spent her
Right.
a small fortune out of her own pocket to get all the training she's gotten, and, um, so, we essentially, at the end of the day, I believe we're offering, not to, like, make this a commercial for us, but we're offering a better product, and so that's because our that particular service is gonna be better, so, yeah, you could go get it cheaper at Joe's Neurofeedback Emporium, but, Joe took an online one-day class and bought the cheapest stuff he could find on eBay,
Mhm.
and you're gonna get what you paid for, you know? Um, so, yeah, I think that's a big part of it too, like quality. I mean, in your line of work is like that,
Right.
like, anybody can call themselves a business coach, um, and, but not everyone's gonna have the tools and things, that you use. I mean, obviously, you give a lot of advice and a lot of guidance and, but also things like, the online, like,
Mhm. Boss.
platform, portal thing is a tool. Yeah, that you guys that you're using. Um, the experience to interact with other business owners, things like that. So, um, that all comes at a price, you know? So, yeah, I think all that factors in as well. Quality
Yeah,
is a big
and I
part of
think
it.
that, when people look at money, they I have no idea where I'm going with this. I was hoping something was gonna come out. Okay, go for
Uh,
it.
I've got another thought that I can pick yeah, okay, and, to backtrack a little bit, something you mentioned a while ago about, using it as a tool, and you mentioned, like, the other people that it affects. That's when you asked about how I look at money, that's another thing I think about, that, whether it's, people that come work at my company, and being able to provide something for them, um, I think that's cool, and obviously the way it affects my own family, you know, um, I talked about freedom, and that's a big motivator for me, and when I first went into business for myself, I took a massive pay cut to start a business, but also with the long game in mind, that, like, yes, now I'm making much less than I could make working somewhere else, but the end goal is to make more than I could ever make working for somebody else, which will then provide for my family. But, I talked about payroll earlier, and when I had first added another therapist, if her checks were big, I got kind of nervous. I would I would think about the number. I'd think about the amount. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a lot of money. And, it would make me nervous, and then one day, for some reason, it just clicked, like, the realization that when she makes more money, I make more money. And I never looked at it like that ever again. Then it was from then on, it was like happy days. When her check is big, I'm happy. And it's still like that now, now that we have several providers. Like, when I'm looking at payroll, when I see those big numbers on people's checks, like, I'm happy. I'm happy for them, and I'm happy for me. That's good news, you know? Um, but yeah, it's cool to know that, to know that someone can earn a decent living, you know? I remember a guy that you and I both know, Alan, I heard him say one time, if, if basically if an organization can make $100,000 that feeds a family, he's kinda rounded it off. And we were in a group with him, and our group, I don't remember how much we had made, but he mentioned how many families that served. And so I kinda keep that in mind, you know, like the families that are affected by that. I try not to think about it too much. I don't ever wanna get, like, too in my head about things like that, but it is kinda nice knowing that somebody can be supported,
Yeah, no,
by
that
the
really is
opportunity
neat,
that
and
you
it
provided.
goes back to that abundance thing, right? And the value, and as you were talking about that, it made me think about a quote that I heard the other day, and we've all heard "inspect what you expect," right? But there was a second sentence to that. It was "inspect what you expect and pay for what you get." And I thought that was really, really good because how many people do we have out there who are getting paid more than they're probably worth? And how many people do we have out there who are getting paid less than they're probably worth, right? And Jim Rohn. I don't
Yeah,
know if everybody knows who Jim Rohn is. He was a motivational speaker, very successful businessman. He talks about work harder on yourself than you do on your business, or work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And I think there's so much value there. He also talked about everybody in the world should make $1 million. And he said, you shouldn't make $1 million for the $1 million. You should make $1 million for the experience and for who you become in the process. And I think that makes a big tie back to what we're talking about here as far as that mindset of money. And do we feel like we deserve it? So are there certain exercises or anything like that, other than therapy, that you do with folks who maybe don't feel like they're worthy of success or worthy of, financial gain?
well, you
Well,
say
I
other
guess
than
that, yeah,
therapy, I
I
mean,
well, I mean,
obviously,
like,
that's a lot of
yeah,
what
I
I
guess,
do.
is there
Yeah,
anything that we can do at
yeah,
home?
um, yeah, um, but yeah, first of all, I mean, explore, like, why? Why do I think this? Where did this come from? You know? Like I was saying earlier, chances are you weren't born with that thought. It came along the way, you know? So, where does it come from? And then analyzing, like, okay, so if I can figure out where that came from, maybe I consider the source, I consider the context. Um, you know, does that hold up, or is there some faulty logic that I can identify there? And you and I've talked before about things like affirmations and things like
Mhm.
that. I think that can be really helpful. Just something as simple as like, I am worthy, you know,
Right.
even if it doesn't feel real, telling yourself that until it does feel real. Um, I think those kinds of things can be helpful. And realizing, like, so that's another thing to tell
Mhm.
yourself is you're just as worthy as anybody else. We're all just people, you know? Um, so yeah, if Jim Rohn or Jeff Bezos or whoever, is worthy of it, well, then you are too. They're just people.
All right. Well, that should do it for this episode of the Business Brains and BS podcast. Remember, progress beats perfection. Hope is not a strategy, but it is a necessity. And the BS that tends to hold us back usually starts in our own heads. So if you enjoyed this episode, follow the show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating, and make sure you share it with a business owner who you think needs to hear it.